Today on Back to the Bible, God calls each of us to step up and step in as compassionate substitutes for Christ. So how are you being called? Pastor Nat Crawford helps you move forward in faith as you consider that question. Later, Back to the Bible CEO and author Cara Whitney will join Pastor Nat with some added perspective for your spiritual journey. Now, here's a quick reminder that this is the last week for you to request your copy of Win the Day. We're looking forward to sending it to you as a thank you for your gift to Back to the Bible. This month's edition features steps for overcoming two very familiar life struggles, guilt and loneliness. Discover how to break free from their hold and move forward in faith. Request your copy of Win the Day at 1-800-759-2425. Again, this is the last week, so call soon. 1-800-759-2425. Or if you prefer to give online, visit us at backtothebible.org. All right, let's join Pastor Nat for today's message.
What comes to mind when I say the word substitute? I would bet you'll think of a word like teacher, a substitute teacher. If you're a sports person, you probably just think of a sub, and that might be a second-string quarterback or maybe a relief pitcher. But I know if you are into sports, you're probably thinking there's a reason why that person is a substitute and not the starter. If you're into musicals and plays, maybe you think of an understudy. And if you're like me, and you pay $100 for Phantom of the Opera tickets, and you open up your guide and you see, oh no, the role of the Phantom is going to be played by an understudy, you begin to wonder, oh, was this a good investment? I bet for you, if I say the word substitute, many of us think of food. We are in a time when we are looking for healthier options. In the world of COVID and we're stuck indoors, we're looking especially now for healthier options. So what do we do when we substitute food? Well, we try to avoid butter, so we used a powdered butter substitute. We want to avoid sugar, so what do we use? We use a sugar substitute that's full of chemicals. Now, I'm not dogging those things, I use those as well. But when I think about food substitutes, there is this ultimate blunder, fake meat. Now, I know we've come a long way with the Beyond Burger, but let's be honest. So many of the fake meats out there, they are bad. I mean, tofu hot dogs? I mean, what's up with that? Hot dogs are that wonderful blend of mystery parts from cows and pigs and goats, horses, rats. Who knows? I don't know what it is, but it's delicious, and I know it's not tofu. But let me share just a brief story with you of a food substitute. It was about 25 years ago, and it was Thanksgiving. My mother and I, we drove up to Omaha to celebrate with my Uncle Steve. And you know this, Thanksgiving, it's one of those sacred meals because you get to gorge yourself on warm, juicy, and flavorful turkey covered in gravy. Oh, man. Well, I will never forget that Thanksgiving because that was the year that I saw the movie Babe. You remember that movie Babe, the movie about the pig? I remember leaving that theater and saying to myself, I will never eat meat again. I remember seeing that movie just being so traumatized, I said, no more meat. So that Thanksgiving, my Uncle Steve, he was very considerate and he served tofurkey. Tofurkey! Can you imagine? I mean, after that Thanksgiving meal, I quickly reverted back to being a meat eater. Tofurkey is toe trashy. It is disgusting. It is a bad substitute. So substitutes aren't always ideal, and let's be honest, sometimes they're not even salvageable. But today we will see how precious and how life-changing Jesus' words of substitution are for us. So we're going to spend time walking with Jesus in John chapter 19, beginning in verse 25. Well, if this is your first time listening or haven't listened for a while, we are actually getting close to wrapping up our series called Rewriting Jesus. Unfortunately, many people today, both non-Christians and Christians, we rewrite Jesus. You see, people ignore what Jesus actually said. They ignore what he actually did. They take Jesus and they rewrite him to look more like themselves. They rewrite Jesus to be a little bit of Buddha, a little bit of Deepak Chopra, and sprinkled with a little bit of Oprah on top. But you see, they rewrite Jesus. And as I said before, it's not just non-believers who do this. Christians do this all the time. Some paint Jesus to be just like any man, but he was a very good moral teacher. And just to make things a little bit unique, he could do some pretty cool parlor tricks. Some paint Jesus as God, but maybe not always being God. He became God. Others paint Jesus as the founder of universalism, who saves all whether they want saving or not. And you get the picture, you understand what I'm saying. People rewrite Jesus. Even us. This is why we're going back to the Bible. We want to hear and we want to see Jesus firsthand through the Bible. So again, today we're looking at two statements by Jesus from the cross, and they are words of substitution. So let's hear his words now, beginning in John chapter 19, beginning in verse 25. But standing by the cross of Jesus were his mother, and his mother's sister, Mary the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus then saw his mother, and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to his mother, "Woman, behold your son." And then he said to the disciple, "Behold your mother." From that hour, the disciple took her into his own household. Christ was put on the cross around 9 a.m. on that Friday. In the previous verses, you see that there are soldiers and they are near the cross. They are near the cross and they are dividing up Jesus' garments. But also standing near the cross are 4 women and John, the disciple whom Jesus loved. Now, before we proceed into this topic of substitution, I can't help but notice the phrase in verse 25. It says, standing by the cross. Perhaps your version says standing near the cross. I want to ask you a question because I think it's a question that we all need to answer. How near are you to the cross of Christ? There were people who were near the cross, but how near are you to the cross? Because we know that there were people who were at the crucifixion site, but in reality, they were really far from the cross. What do I mean by that? Well, they didn't care about Jesus, and they didn't care why he was there. In other words, they were indifferent. They were indifferent towards the cross of Christ. Is this you? Are you far from the cross with indifference towards Christ? Maybe you've been around the church your whole life. You go to church twice a year. You go there for Easter. You hear the Easter message. You see the cross on your wall at home. But over time, you have become indifferent. When you see the cross, you maybe think of a piece of art. Maybe you wear a piece of jewelry around your neck. But when you see the cross, you forget that horrific history, the story of the cross. When we see the cross, we're supposed to remember what happened, but you forget. You see that cross, but you ignore the price it represents for your salvation. Theologian John Stott said, "The essential background to the cross, therefore, is a balanced understanding of the gravity of sin and the majesty of God. If we diminish either, we diminish the cross." For many, they may be near the cross, but they've diminished its meaning. And now they're indifferent. Is this you? Now maybe that's not you. Maybe you're not indifferent, but maybe you're uncommitted. Again, there were people, there were soldiers who were near the cross. These soldiers, they likely had heard his trial with Pilate. They walked with Jesus as he carried the cross. They heard his words of forgiveness and compassion from the cross, and yet they didn't believe him. They were uncommitted. Is this you? Have you been near the cross for a long time, coming to church for years, but yet you remain disbelieving and uncommitted? I think many people today are near the cross. They've gone to church most of their life, or at least maybe as a youth. They likely went to a youth camp of some kind. They probably did a vacation Bible school or two. Again, they probably hit a major holiday service once or twice a year. When you check their social media profile, they have Christian as their worldview. But when you look at their pictures online, what do you see? It's pictures of bars, of parties, of curse words. These people, they maybe don't tithe, they don't really go to church. They surely haven't looked at their Bible in ages, but in their mind, they're near the cross. But in reality, they're uncommitted. Is this you? But then think about the 4 women and John. Think about them because they were near the cross and they believed Jesus. They needed him. In fact, they needed that cross. Is this you? Do you believe in Jesus? Do you recognize how much you need him and you need that cross? Whether you've been saved 5 minutes, 5 years, or 50 years, you still recognize the power of the cross, and you still recognize your need of that cross. You know, some people, they become saved, and over time they think, well, I'm glad that saving part is over. Now it is time to keep on living. Now, they don't live a gross life. They don't live an offensive life, but they forget the daily need of God's grace. They forget the reason why they are a child of God. And that reason is because of the cross of Christ. So are you daily dependent upon the cross? Do you still recognize you need the cross? Again, how close are you to the cross? Which one are you today? Regardless of your answer, know this. Proximity to the cross is not what makes you a Christian. I know many people who have been near the cross their whole lives but have rejected Jesus and the salvation he provides. How near are you to the cross? How you answer will shape how you will hear and apply today's message. As you think about that, I want to go to our discussion partners, Arnie Cole and Cara Whitney, for a moment. Arnie, what kind of posture should we have towards people who call themselves a Christian, but they don't really act like it? They're either indifferent or uncommitted.
Actually, Nat, with all of our research on people's spiritual lives, I think the hardest group of people to convince they need Jesus are the notional Christians. They follow their notions of Jesus Christ. They say they believe in Jesus, but they're not committed. They think they're going to heaven, but there's no outward proof of any life transformation, any changed behavior. And they're the ones, they're thinking they're going to heaven. They're a tough group who doesn't have an unmet need. And until there's a crisis in their life, they just don't come around. And you find a lot of kids that walk away from their faith. They really still think they're going to heaven. You know, they made a decision at camp when they were in 5th grade. And all roads lead to heaven. You know, Jesus is a great guy. They have no need. So it's a tremendous challenge of those of us that are interested in evangelism and discipleship, of those people that they think they're a part of the body. and they're not.
So what do you suggest to do with those people? I mean, should we pray for them? Should we confront them? I mean, what's your posture on this?
It's evangelism by daily discipleship. You got to work with people on a daily basis. So sure, pray, get to know, but it takes a daily walk with someone, especially like that.
Yeah, in a couple of days, we're actually going to be talking about the lukewarm church from Revelation 3. So I think that it's going to be an eye-opening conversation for people. But I think you're exactly right. The nominal Christians, they are one of the hardest groups because they think they've got it. They think that they've accomplished it. They've gotten their golden ticket to heaven, and so they're good. But the reality is they are those people, or could be those people, that on that day Jesus goes, I never knew you. That is a scary thought, and that's why we need to be constantly preaching the gospel to ourselves and to those around us. Not to be judgmental, not to be harsh, but simply because this really does matter for here and eternity. Cara, Christianity is countercultural, and our culture does not like the term need, needs, or needy. But why are those words so crucial to our lives as Christians?
Because we sin every day, and we need the cross. There's not one day that goes by that I don't need forgiveness from God. Some days I might appear to be more Christ-like than other days, but I need Jesus' salvation plan every day. New mercies, new heaping amounts of grace from God. Pour it on me and also towards other people.
I think that's one of the opportunities for pain and suffering in the world. It reminds people that they do need God. And so those moments where it's hard to watch our friends and family and the people we encounter struggle so much, but it's in those moments that they do recognize that they are powerless and they need some help from someone outside of themselves. And it's those moments that we can point them back to God.
We all have our struggles, and sometimes those struggles can leave you feeling guilty and all alone. But in this month's edition of Win the Day, Pastor Nat shares the good news that God's grace is meant for you, even when you think you're unworthy of His love.
If you're wrestling with guilt or loneliness, let this issue of Win the Day help you rest in the riches of God's grace and enjoy His presence in your life.
Win the Day is our gift to thank you for your support of Back to the Bible. But this is the last week for you to make your request, so call today. The number is 1-800-759-2425. Again, 1-800-759-2425. Or if you prefer to give online, visit backtothebible.org. backtothebible.org. Now here's Pastor Nat with more of today's message.
Now, think about this. The Son of God, Jesus Christ, is hanging on the cross. He's been mocked, He's been flogged, and He is experiencing the most excruciating form of punishment ever conceived. And He is preparing now to take His suffering to a whole new level. And yet, He doesn't forget His own humanity and His relationship to His mother and His disciple whom He loved. He looks down on His weeping mother and this grieving disciple, and He has compassion on them. Here we see Jesus' words to His mother and John are not just words of substitution, but they are compassionate substitution. He looks down and He says, "Woman." Now, if you read the gospel accounts of Jesus' life, you won't find Jesus calling Mary mother. Instead, He calls her woman. This shouldn't turn us off. This was simply Him being respectful. But also, it's reflective of Him being a heavenly Son and her an earthly mother. Jesus was the firstborn, and this meant as a widow, Mary was Jesus' responsibility to care for. Even while dying on the cross, He has compassion. And in this moment, He provides a substitution for a son. Jesus' half-brothers did not believe that Jesus was divine. So he puts the care of Mary in the hands of John, his beloved disciple. If you are listening today and you are a Christian, a follower of Christ, this compassionate substitution affects you today. How? Well, just like Mary gaining a son and John gaining a mother, so you too, when you become a follower of Christ, you come into a new family. Paul writes in Ephesians 1:5 that God decided in advance to adopt us into his own family by bringing us to himself through Jesus Christ. This is what he wanted to do, and it gave him great pleasure. Because of Jesus' death on the cross, we now become part of his family. And because of this, we have new responsibilities. Do you realize that we are his substitute? His ambassadors on this earth as his family members. Just like John had the responsibility of caring for Mary, we too have the responsibility of caring for each other as believers. Galatians 6:2 says, "Share each other's burdens, and in this way obey the law of Christ." We are to keep an eye out for the needs of each other and help out when we can. The Bible, it gets even more specific. Listen to what Paul writes in 1 Timothy. He says, "Take care of any widow who has no one else to care for her. But if she has children or grandchildren, their first responsibility is to show godliness at home and repay their parents by taking care of them. This is something that pleases God." I can guarantee you that there are widows in your church and there are widows in your neighborhood today. There are single mothers who are trying and they are struggling to care for their kids in your workplace, where you shop, and maybe in your own backyard. So what are you doing to care for the needs of the widow, of the single mom? What about the children today who need a surrogate father or mother? Are you stepping up to help them? Jesus' words of compassionate substitution apply to us today. Perhaps you've heard this story before, but even so, it's incredibly powerful and convicting. A number of years ago, a woman was abandoned by her husband for the affections of another woman. The affair went all the way when he divorced his wife and married his mistress. Well, years later, this man would have children with this new spouse, but then he was diagnosed with terminal cancer. He knew his wife could not care for the children on her own. So what did he do? He called up his ex-wife and asked her to help with the responsibility of raising his children that resulted from his infidelity. Amazingly, this ex-wife, she did as she was asked. She would end up raising these children as if they were her own. When asked how could she do this, how could she show so much compassion for these kids, this is what she said. She said, "God's love gave me the grace to forgive and accept his children as my own." That is substitution. That is compassion. We, as God's adopted children, are called to show supernatural compassion to those in the body of Christ and those outside of the church. You know, when I was young, I didn't have a lot of male role models in my life. I was actually raised in a hair salon, so I have a pretty good idea of how to carry on a conversation, wash someone's hair, and even answer some phones. But that traditional male influence wasn't there in my life. But thankfully, I had friends with dads who stepped up. One dad, Mark, he was especially kind. He would be working on projects at his home or watching This Old House, and he would show me different tools and how he was using them on different projects. But he would go beyond just the teaching about tools. He would ask me how I was doing. He would ask about life. And in time, Mark would become one of my small group leaders through youth group. Mark had a great impact on me because he recognized a need that he could fill. So he stepped up as a follower of Christ and he showed compassionate substitution. This is one of the reasons why I coach youth sports. First and foremost, I'll be honest, I do it to be with my kids. I love being with them. My time and my intimate influence is slowly fading away, so I'm trying to capitalize on it. But one of the ways I can do so is by coaching. I began coaching football about 5 years ago. Now, I didn't play football growing up. I played on the Xbox, but I know that doesn't count. But I knew I could learn. I knew I could grow, so I began to coach. We have anywhere from 6 to 12 kids on a team. Oftentimes, it's my son and their friends. But what I love to do is create an outreach team where we have kids from the community. And here's what I've found. So many of these kids, they come from broken homes, and sometimes they come from very difficult situations. I could never replace their father or really fix whatever's broken in their lives, but I do know that I can be a substitute. I can show them compassion, and I can help them in their time of need. Because of this posture, I've taken calls and text messages late at night from parents who are confused and broken. I've heard kids cry on the football field because of hard situations at home or at school. I sit, I listen, I pray, and I'm just there. We are to show compassion to those around us, to the widows, to the orphans, to the single moms, to the kids, to anyone God puts in our path. So the question is, who has God put in your path? I have to say that I am surrounded by people who minister daily to people that they come across. And Arnie and Cara, you are two of those people. Would each of you tell us how you run into those opportunities to minister?
A lot of times, God brings them to me. So you just have to pay attention. You got to get your face out of your phone and be obedient to the calling. I've been called to tell people about Jesus, so I'm just looking for those opportunities. But I really do believe God brings them to me.
So I think the key thing that Cara is saying, and the difference between Cara and I, and what I so admire about her, is she's always looking for those opportunities. And for me, it's like, hey, stupid, I'll have my wife say, or my daughter, or both of them say, hey, man, I heard that guy's really struggling. Would you go talk to him with his, struggling with his marriage? And I'm working on some research or doing this or that. And, and somebody texts me, hey, weren't you going to go? And it's like, oh, yeah. So I work on being more intentional because it is so wonderful when you can just share with somebody or listen and at the end of the conversation say, I'm going to commit this week to pray for you and your wife and that your marriage will be restored. I'm not a therapist. There's not much I can do. But if there's anything I can do to help you, and just know I'm always here to listen. Here's my phone number, but I need prompting. One of my things this year is to be more intentional. So I don't need, God to paint a banner, fly things over, and then have my family nudge me. So I'm working on it. I'm a work in progress, as they say.
Well, I think we all are. And I think being aware and also creating margin are two things that we can all do better. I think there are those exceptions, like Cara, who just attracts people, and she's very good at creating that margin in her life for them. But I think we all can work on being aware of the opportunities that God has put around us, and then creating margin to engage in those opportunities. Have either of you been influenced by someone who has shown you extraordinary compassion?
Yes, but mostly I've seen someone that's influenced me in action. My mother-in-law, without divulging anything without her permission, I've witnessed her forgive someone in her life who the world would easily define as unforgivable. Forgiveness, I think, hands down, is the best, most important form of compassion. I've seen it work when you in an impossible situation.
Yeah, I think for me, extraordinary compassion. Through my sicknesses, I've had a lot of people pray for me, and that's meant the world, and that is extraordinary. I have one friend, though, and I was in chemo I think, for 4 months, and then I had surgery. I was in a pretty bad shape for about a year or several years, but a year in particular. And this friend of mine called me every single day. Every day. Only time he didn't call is when I was in surgery, and then he would call Shar. I've never forgotten that. And his compassion towards me has taught me to be much more compassionate to other people.
Yeah, it's neat to see how God moves through people and the impact it has on our lives. My best friend has got compassion down to an art form. He's a single guy, but yet, I mean, when Tiff and I have had moments of struggle, he'll be like, hey, can I come over and watch the kids for you? And I'm like, that's really a big act of compassion, because, I mean, he's not familiar with it. Or something breaks down, hey, can I give you my car? No, you don't need to give us your car. But I mean, there's those people who just ooze compassion. And what's great is when we observe it and we embrace it can become part of our lives as well. So that motivates us to show that to others. You know, for someone who is listening today and on the fence about stepping out and offering themselves in a compassionate, substitutionary way, Arnie, what is the first step?
You know, it's like the Nike ad, just do it. I have this friend of mine who's a farmer, horse guy, and pretty private, and he got pretty sick, and somebody must have visited him. Well, he came and visited me, and he's not that kind of guy. And lo and behold, he took that first step, and then 3 days later, he brought his wife, and then 3 days later, he brought his wife and kids, and then they came like 4 or 5 times. But I could see in his life that he was taking one step at a time and thought, oh, wow, you know, I'm not only blessing this guy, I'm being blessed. And then he brought his wife. It is a hurting world, and it's easy to take the first step. You just got to be intentional.
Cara, why do they need to do this sooner than later? Just that first step, just do it.
Because it will change everything. And for generations, I think, depending on the situation, I mean, taking a first step towards compassion. Look, I'm an introvert. It's hard for me to reach out, but I just had to make a choice that I loved the Lord and I trusted Him more than my fear. And so I just reach out, and it changes everything. It changed everything for me, and it changes the lives of other people. I mean, let people know that they matter and they care. That's an awesome gift.
I think a lot of times people would say, especially like with Cara, oh, it's easy for her, because they're so intentional. You just assume it's easy. But I know Cara well. I know before she's done interviews, she wants to puke. You know, she's nervous. She's scared. I mean, it's not a natural thing. She's not an insurance salesman or a used car salesman type. It is being intentional, doing what the Lord directs. I mean, it's just amazing when you see it in another person.
You need to be like Bob and What About Bob, right? Baby steps.
That's what
Baby
I do,
steps.
man. When I did Fox News, I just let the Lord take the situation. I was so scared. When I came off of that floor and I walked through those doors and it was over, I wept. I bawled because the Lord just carried me on there. I did it. And you can tell when you watch it, it's awkward. But you know what? I got the gospel out. And that's all. And then my job was done. And then I fell apart.
Right.
And went and had some eggs. Which I couldn't even eat because I was so sick.
Oh, man. Yeah.
But I did it. I did it.
Well, and it's all about, again, the posture. You wanted to obey God, and you let Him do the heavy lifting, and that's what He does all the time. He's not looking for the A players. He's just looking for everyday people who are willing to be obedient.
You're listening to Back to the Bible, where your spiritual journey is our number one priority. Now, as we wrap up today's study, here's a quick reminder that this is the last week for you to request your copy of Win the Day. We're looking forward to sending it to you as a thank you for your gift to Back to the Bible. This month's edition features steps for overcoming two very familiar life struggles, guilt and loneliness. Discover how to break free from their hold and move forward in faith. Request your copy of Win the Day at 1-800-759-2425. Again, this is the last week, so call soon. 1-800-759-2425. Or if you prefer to give online, visit us at backtothebible.org.
Thank you for listening to Back to the Bible and supporting us through your prayer and gifts. And now, let me encourage you to stand firm, stand faithful, and stand on God's Word.
Do you need some prayer support? We'd be happy to pray for you. Just join our online prayer group at backtothebible.org.